The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good day, everyone. My name is Krista Brown, Training Specialist with the APS Technical Assistance Resource Center, APS TARC, and I want to welcome you to our Formula Grant webinar, Developing and/or Expanding an APS Quality Assurance Program with Carl Urban, Stacey Lindberg, and Julie Orozco. I'll be introducing our presenters in just a minute. Next slide. Before we get started, I'd like to share a little bit of information. This webinar is being hosted by the APS TARC, which is a project of the U.S. Administration for Community Living, Administration on Aging, Department of Health and Human Services, and administered by WRMA Incorporated. Contractors' findings, conclusions, and points of view do not necessarily represent the official policy of the federal government. Opinions expressed by presenters of county or local APS programs are those of the individual locale and do not reflect the opinion of the greater state program or the Administration for Community Living. Next slide. The APS TARC works with states and territories to enhance the effectiveness of APS programs by working with partners on the use of data and analytics, applying research and evaluation to practice, and encouraging the use of innovative practices and strategies. We are here to help APS programs in any way we can, including technical assistance. So just reach out to us using the contact information that will be displayed at the end of the webinar. Next slide. Okay, a little bit of housekeeping. We have a handout of today's slides and a very great sample QA and QA reports handout in the handout section of your webinar control panel, and you can download those at any time. Please use your computer speakers to access audio, and you can control that audio as you see fit. If you do experience audio or broadband problems due to internet connection speeds, oops, let's have somebody mute there. I think it might be you, Carl. Go ahead and exit the webinar and re-enter. Next slide. You may ask questions of our presenters at any time using the questions box, and we will have time at the end for Q&A. This presentation is being recorded and will be posted to the TARC website at a later date, and we will let everyone know when that's ready. And last but not least, all attendees will receive an automatically generated notice that the certificate of attendance is ready for you to download. And go ahead and take the webinar survey when you're prompted at the end of the webinar. We'd love to hear from you. So next slide. Let me go ahead and introduce our speakers. It's really a great pleasure to be able to work with a couple folks from California again, and of course, Carl is here too. So Stacey Lindberg is a retired program manager too from County of Orange Social Services Agency Adult Protective Services in California. Julie Orozco is a Deputy Director in Riverside County Department of Public Social Services, Adult Protective Services Division, also in California. And Carl Urban is Senior Research Manager for the APS TARC, WRMA Incorporated. So an outline of our webinar today really quickly. First up, Carl will share with us what the TARC currently knows about APS QA practices from the evaluation survey. Then we will hear from Stacey and Julie on the nuts and bolts of developing and/or expanding an APS QA program, and we'll end with some Q&A and resources. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it on over to Carl. Go ahead and take it away.
All right, so next slide. So good afternoon or morning, everybody. I am going to basically just set the very broad framework for the good information you're going to get from the folks from California. I want to just reference a couple of things that we've done here at the APS TARC in terms of some TA stuff, as well as reference some evaluation stuff, not yet published, but soon to be published, so you'll get a first glimpse of some of that. On this slide, you see two diagrams, and these come from a QA brief that we developed. They were sort of our way of thinking about or framing how we think about quality assurance, and they just provide a little bit of a model to think about things. They basically answered two questions: why do technical assistance and how to do technical assistance. So the kind of the Venn diagram thing on the left is the why do QA. And there are four interrelated reasons that you see there. And as I was looking at this a minute ago, I got to thinking, I wish I had done this a little bit differently. I wish I had put the improved services for clients in the middle and had put the other three around it. Because ultimately what we're trying to do is get to improve services for clients. And QA helps you to do that because it gives you information. It sets up feedback processes. It gives you those feedback loops that you can incorporate into your program to help improve things. And those feedback processes would create an accountability mechanism for your staff and for your program. You can use data from QA, the feedback from QA, to help hold people and program units, regions, whatever, accountable. The second thing is QA should measure how good you are doing with your policy compliance. And if you are not complying with policy, well then you may need to do some things to address that. Maybe the policy and the practice needs to change. Or maybe you need to make it a goal to improve in a particular area. And along those lines, that same feedback loop will tell you where you need to focus more efforts on training, whether that's your initial training for staff or retraining for staff. So that's why I do QA. How to do QA is in the pyramid model on the right. So what you see here is three different levels. And as you go up the pyramid, I think what we found is that fewer and fewer programs do the things because they get more expensive and take a little bit more effort to do so. But in that base level, what you see are supervisor review and approval and case documentation. And this is stuff that happens as part of every case, as part of casework flow. I think these are mechanisms that most all programs, as we'll see on the next slide, have incorporated. The mid-level, not as many programs do these kinds of things. They are not part of the casework flow. And depending on how you use data, you may not even be actually looking at every case. If you have a really sophisticated performance management system, you should be looking at data from every case to help feed into those feedback loops in the Venn diagram. Case reading, as a case reading project, you're really never going to read every case. And there are different types of case reading. We have done a TA product specifically on case reading. I would encourage you to go look at it if you're interested in types of case reading. But basically, you got case reading done by your casework staff, or you can have your own independent case readers. And there are different ways to scoring and using case reading. The top level is basically more formalized research in terms of program evaluation. Often can be and maybe should be conducted independent of the program itself. Next slide.
So Andy, you're going to have to go. Okay. So this was the last slide. So one more now.
No, not one more now. He's good.
Is he good? Okay. Sorry.
He's good. So this next slide shows some survey results from the practice survey that we did a while back. And we just simply asked about methods to ensure high quality casework. These align pretty closely to the model on the previous page. In hindsight, we did change the survey questions a little bit based on the model, but that's hindsight. The overall number of responses for this potentially is 56. And so you can see supervisor interactions done by almost all programs, standardized case documentation requirements, almost all programs. And as you go down from there, you get fewer and fewer programs that are doing case staffings and having some sort of systemized review of a subset of cases. So next slide. So, this is just one question out of several and different types of inputs that we had into the QA part of the evaluation, and here's just some high-level takeaway findings from that. One of the things that we found is that resources and activities vary significantly across APS programs. I mean, you saw that in the data on the previous slide. And so those, and not surprisingly, those programs that use QA activities that require less resources have them built into the case flow. And so you get supervisor periodic review of cases in most states, and much fewer states that are using independent case reviewers. Most programs indicate that they're using data to manage the programs, although we know from the qualitative comments in the survey that a lot of the programs want to figure out how to better use data for their management practices. We also asked a question in the survey about how do you look at client outcomes? Gave them a number of different options. Really, the only way programs systemically look at client outcomes these days is through trying to look at recidivistic or recurrent cases. Otherwise, programs don't have real good mechanisms for looking at client outcomes. So the takeaway here is that those base levels in that pyramid are pretty much done by most programs, and after that it drops off pretty significantly in terms of the number of programs that do different types of QA activities. And with that, I will hang around for questions at the end, but we'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Hi, this is Stacey Lindberg, retired manager from the County of Orange, Adult Protective Services, and thanks for joining us today. We have, in the next couple of slides, some polls, and if, Krista, if you could help us launch those.
Sure, I just launched the first one. So do you conduct QA for your county or state? And we're getting some responses in right now. And if you're not sure, go ahead and let us know in the questions box why that might be the case. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close it now and share the results. So there you go. Looks like we have 65% yes and about 35% no, with about 79% of folks voting.
Okay, and then I think we have one more other poll.
Yes, actually a couple. So here's the second one. I'm going to launch it. So do your APS supervisors review and approve every case closed? So that one is now open and getting some responses. If you're not sure, go ahead and use that questions box and let us know a little bit more about that. All right. I always like to try to get it to 75%. Okay, we're gonna close it now. About 77%, and I'll share that. So there is yes, 86%, no, 8%, and not sure is 6%. So, and I think you have one more poll. Okay, gonna launch that one. For those counties, states who do have a QA program, how would you rank your QA system? So is it level 1, level 2, or level 3? And you see those descriptions there. We got folks voting as we speak. Right. Go ahead and submit. Couple more seconds. All right. We have about 70% voted. I'm going to go ahead and close and share those results. Oh my goodness, it's about a third of
evenly spread.
Yeah. So you'll see that there. Yeah. All right.
Perfect. Okay.
All righty.
Next slide, please.
So I think those are just the poll slides. Okay. So yeah.
Next slide. Next slide. There we go. Perfect. All right. So thank you for participating in those polls. That gives Julie and I a little bit of information about who we're talking to. So For those 65% that are already currently doing QA, you already know that this is best practice. But for that 35%, I am so excited that you're here today and that you are considering this, because why do QA? QA is both encouraged and highly stressed by the ACL and NAPSA, that they recognize that it's best practice and they want you to do that. They also recommend that APS conducts supervisory case reviews at critical case junctions. So of the 65% that are currently doing it, 86 of you are already using your supervisor. So that is great. So hopefully at the end of this training, those of you that are currently doing QA will learn or maybe challenge yourself to try and go to that next level. And those of you that aren't doing QA, you'll begin to think about and get some tools that you can start your own QA system here soon. Next slide, please. All right. So quality assurance, it's got, you know, sometimes it gets a bad rap as far as people looking at it, trying to figure out what it is. But what in the County of Orange, when we started doing this, I knew that we were doing a good job, but now I had the data behind it that I could show my executives what kind of great things my workers were doing. It assesses the APS performance. Are you doing what you say you're going to be doing? And are you doing what your regulations mandate you to do? It helps support all of that. It assists in identifying any gaps or areas that are needing improvement. It supports consistency in practice. It really does assist in future training needs. It shows where you have gaps. And then lastly, it is a support for managers, that you're able to take some of these reports that we're going to talk about later on and be able to show, again, what APS is doing. Next slide, please.
Okay, thanks, Stacey. So my name is Julie. I know this is the first slide I'm talking on, but I'm with Riverside County. And I just wanted to start by talking a little bit about the terminology. I think there's lots of terms that are used to describe this type of work. You probably have heard of QA, quality assurance. You may have heard of QC, quality control. And so, you know, some of the minor differences are that quality assurance is really about, are we meeting the requirements of the program, right? Are the standards being met? Quality control is really about that, is what we're doing producing quality products. And then there's the third, continuous quality improvement. And I really hope that that is the ultimate goal for everybody here today. You know, a continuous quality improvement, to me, it's a philosophy, it's approach, it's a culture, but essentially is, you know, you have systems in place to be able to assess the quality of work being done, to assess that we're meeting compliance measures, and then beyond that. But we're then using those findings and what we find to inform training needs, to inform policy gaps, to inform practice issues. And it's really being used to then impact quality improvement for the long haul. You can go to the next slide. In your handouts, you'll see these defined a little bit more, but go ahead and go to the next slide. And so as we talked about earlier, it looks like a lot of you have supervisors that are already reviewing cases. And a lot of people don't realize that is, in and of itself, QA. You have a supervisor who's reviewing a case, and they probably have to approve certain components of that case. They're probably reviewing the risk assessment and approving it. They're reviewing the service plan and approving it. They're reviewing allegation findings. And I'm sure at any one of those stages, if they're not satisfied with something, if they feel like something is not documented, if something is missing, if something is unclear and not answered, they would then, you know, give some feedback to the worker and say, you know, I need you to correct these. That is all a form of QA. Again, and the supervisors, if they're approving cases for closure, that is their ultimate QA signature saying, I approve this case and this investigation, right? So that is your first level QA. And I think most people in adult protective services are doing that level of QA, you know, as a foundation and probably some beyond. Next slide. So really, when we look at quality assurance programs, I want to talk a little bit about structures because they can vary depending on the agency that you're with. So some folks, they have an internal program level QA system, meaning maybe staff review some cases. You know, that could be like you have a staff member who, in order to submit a case for closure, they have to do some type of, you know, transfer checklist or closure checklist saying, all of these things are in the case, I attest to it, and this is ready for closure. That's a small example. You have supervisor review. So sometimes supervisors are only, you know, reviewing the cases like we just described, all those case components, but sometimes programs are at the level where they're actually doing full case audits on a certain number of cases per month, but that's again all internal to program. And then some programs have a manager review where the manager also has to randomly select so many cases and they have to do some type of manager level audit. So that is like an internal structure. Then some programs have an external team, maybe somebody in your administration team. They're independent reviewers that are also having some level of review of those cases, right? So for example, in Riverside County, we have a combination of both, and that's in the third structure. So we do have supervisors and managers within the program doing case audits and case reviews every month. But in addition to that, we also have a team of folks that are also doing independent reviews on a variety of different things. And we'll get into some of those examples a little bit later. But I think all of this to say is all of these are good. And I think it depends on, you know, the size of your agency, you know, your resources, your budget. And so, you know, just because I'm saying, you know, combination's great, that doesn't mean that every agency, every county can support a combo program. And so really, I just, you know, encourage you to start small, take baby steps, and, you know, just try to think about where you can implement QA as you are able to based on your staffing and resources. Next slide.
All right, thanks, Julie. So for the 35% of you that took the poll that haven't done QA, what are some of the considerations that you might want to think about before you take on QA? And that for that 65% of you that are already doing it, maybe you want to add something new and trying to figure out how to present this to staff. The first thing you want to be thinking about is buy-in. At least here in the County of Orange, when we introduced this, the staff thought it was Big Brother. They thought it was an internal investigation and that it was trying to find the bad things that were happening to them. And so my supervisors and I basically shared the QA form. So in the handouts, I think there's some examples, but we shared that form. So it was, staff knew exactly what we were looking at. It wasn't a mystery to them, and it was a buy-in that we got for them. Staffing, like Julie was just talking about, you know, what staff are you going to be using to do this? Is it that you're going to use your existing staff in the County of Orange? That's what we did. It just became part of their supervisor expectations that they were doing these. But other counties have a whole separate entity. Readiness.
Next slide.
I think it's, oh, yeah, I think we're just going over all these real fast and then we'll go into more detail.
Perfect.
Yeah. So then you're thinking about readiness, and that really just comes down to the why of it. And then also you're looking for documentations for QA, data collections. You know, again, as I mentioned, I knew that we were doing a really good job, but I then had the data to be able to support this and to show what our strengths are, and then possible areas of needing improvement. And then last, the last consideration would be reporting it out. Is just don't have these things sit on your shelves collecting dust, but actually share this data out. And I know that APS is just beginning to get kind of up to speed on sharing data, but this is really an important thing. The next couple of slides, I am going to highlight a few of these, so if you don't mind moving to the next slide, that would be helpful. All right, so buy-in. I'll go into a little more detail about this. As my staff, when I presented this to them, both my supervisors and the line staff, they were wondering, why are we doing this? Because it wasn't mandated by anybody. Who cares what we're doing? We know we're doing a good job. So it took a lot of reframing and educating on the best practice and just kind of trying to show them that this is another way for us to explain to our executive team that we are doing a good job. Our county had been doing it for a while, and that we analyzed the data, and we actually did find an issue that our staff had been interpreting what day the 10-day report started on, and from there we were able to get this as a training need. So I was able to show that to staff, and they're like, they understood it a little bit better. And now that we're doing this, the supervisors are using this QA format in their monthly meetings with their staff and being very transparent with it. So it's, again, trying to get that buy-in from staff, because as I'm sure some of you have experienced, if your staff aren't in it, you're going to have a lot of difficulty trying to move this along. But if you're explaining the why behind it, sometimes that helps. Next slide, please. As Julie mentioned too, getting into staffing, and it doesn't really matter what, if you're able to use existing staff or if you're bringing on new staff or different department to do it, but just trying to assess what this workload issue was. And that was something that Orange County kind of learned at the beginning when we were doing this. The supervisors who conduct this were doing these QA reviews on a quarterly basis. And now they're doing it on a monthly basis. Well, that could be a staff load workload issue for those that are doing that. So you do need to take that into consideration. How frequently they're doing this, what size unit they have, and how many are they having to do? How many are you asking them to do per staff member? And then the other question you want to consider when in staffing is who should be conducting these? And there isn't a right or wrong, but is it going to be your line staff? Is it going to be managers? Is it an administrative team that is doing that? Again, the County of Orange, we used our internal supervisors and managers to do that. But now we are looking at adding an admin piece to that. Next slide, please. So the last point that I just wanted to highlight is about is your organization and are your employees ready? And really, how do you figure that out? I think it's getting your supervisors behind you. It also, at least here in the state of California, both child welfare and IHSS, this is part of their work. It's state funded. So if you're trying to figure out, scratching your head, where to even start, you may want to talk to some of your peers in those departments and ask them how they were able to get this quality assurance readiness behind there. And going with that why, that I can't stress that enough. In the APS world, you need to really explain that why. I think a lot of times we've implemented things historically and then haven't explained the why. And that does help people shift in their buy-in and getting ready to help you out. The other thing you want to consider is your manager or division chief, are they supporting this? Are they ready for this? Are they ready to find out, when you peel it back and find out, what the good things you're doing, but also where your deficits are? Are they ready to help you to fix those and, train those to make sure that you're not having difficulty in those areas? And then also just helping the fear, because as I mentioned earlier, at least in Orange County, when we first rolled this out, there was a lot of hesitancy, a lot of fear that some of this might be punitive, that maybe there'd be disciplinary actions coming from it. And I think just trying to help dispel those and make sure that that we're just trying to improve our work and trying to better us. I think that was what helped our staff get behind this pretty quickly. Next slide.
And then Stacey, just to add to that, I think, in Riverside County, we had gone through some, kind of these culture transitions, right? Where we were trying to really be strengths-based. We were really trying to focus on becoming like a learning organization. And if you look up those types of, articles and research, we really tried to work on that too as we were rolling this out, which helped to really set the framework for moving into this new phase where we're going to be looking for areas for improvement, but it's not this punitive person-focused thing. It's more about, if we're finding gaps, if we're finding errors, then maybe there's something that's not clear in policy, not clear in procedures, not not realistic or something, right? So it just allowed us to approach it from a different place.
Yeah, Julie, it was like trends. You're looking at those trends that you're trying to figure out. Yes, I agree completely. Thanks.
No worries. On this slide, we really outlined some different levels of quality assurance reviews, and we're going to go into each of these in detail. But really, it's looking at, which types of QA reviews might be considered a basic level, an intermediate level, and advanced level. And then Stacey and I will give some examples of each. Next slide. So on your basic levels, these really are ones that most agencies are doing, right? So we usually track, are we being compliant with state mandates? So for example, for APS, let's say you have to respond to referrals within an immediate timeline or a 10-day timeline. And a lot of times we are tracking to see if we're timely on those issues. There's also state regulations related to, approval of service plans and risk assessments and things like that, right? So all of those case component reviews that supervisors are doing, not only are they doing them, and that is that basic level of QA they're doing throughout the life of a case, but also if there's any regulation requirements as far as timelines for approval of those, a lot of counties are tracking those to see if we're compliant or not. A lot of times counties are tracking things like critical incident reviews. You may call this something different, but when a critical incident occurs on a case, there's usually a higher level of scrutiny on that case just to figure out what happened, what occurred, what services did we provide, what services could we have provided, is there anything else that we could have done differently that may have resulted in a different outcome, right? So sometimes we look at those cases a little bit more thoroughly during those critical incidents. Same thing for death reviews. So, you may, especially for suspicious deaths or deaths of clients, deaths involving clients that were receiving services, you may be looking at those cases more thoroughly to review and kind of like an after incident review. And then finally, litigation reviews. So if your county is notified that there's some type of litigation or lawsuit, oftentimes we're asked to review cases in depth to kind of look at an overview of what was provided and any gaps, right? So those are what we consider kind of basic level reviews, because those are what are in place in a lot of different counties. Next slide.
So Julie, also the 34% of you that indicated that you're doing level 1, i.e. the basic right now, I'm going to challenge you that these next 2 slides, see if you can move to the next level. See if you can move up a little bit and try something to advance your county or state. Go ahead.
Well, thanks, Stacey. So for more intermediate reviews, these are, let's say in Riverside County and Orange County, right, there's certain things that we have to look at every month. So for example, our supervisors have to complete a certain number of reviews, case audits, and there's forms that they have to submit. They're due by a certain date, right? And the QA team is looking at those. And then the managers have to do more of like a qualitative kind of case review. So whereas the supervisor is focused more on a quantitative compliance audit type of process, were the requirements in the case met? Were all the things in the case that were supposed to be in the case? Did they meet basic standards in these areas? A manager might look at more of a qualitative level. Was the quality of the investigation, what was the, how was the quality of the investigation? How was the quality of the service delivery? How do you feel about the findings and determinations? Kind of areas of strength and areas for development. But it's beyond that normal day-to-day case review. These are selected number of cases that are being selected for audit. Another thing is field observations, or people often refer to them as ride-alongs, where supervisors or others are actually going out during investigations or follow-up visits with the social worker, the clients, and any kind of collateral family members to really observe their interactions with those folks and to really be able to give some in the moment feedback on areas of strength and areas for development. Is there anything you'd like to add, Stacey?
Yeah, I was just going to talk about the ride-alongs. I know that, you know, if you're talking to your supervisors who, you know, have come from the field, this is something that they might be very excited to do, is to get back out in the field and get their social worker hats back on. I know my supervisors jumped at this chance, but it was also to be used as them being reacquainted with our clients and being able to kind of see what their staff are doing out in the fields. And the other thing too is that you can use this for performance reviews. You can talk about that they went out and observed your staff during, you know, I always had them do it a couple months just before the evaluation was due, just so that it would be fresh on their mind so that they could add it into their performance reviews. But this was a really positive thing for my supervisors to be able to go back out in the field and kind of get reacquainted with the clients, not just read it on paper. That's it.
Thanks, Stacey. Next slide. Now we're going to talk a little bit about more advanced reviews, right? So some things that you might be able to add to your QA practice is peer reviews. So what this looks like in Riverside County is every month, a supervisor is required to review, let's say, 2 cases from their units. But one of them is they're reviewing their own case, and one of them they're sending to a peer for review, right? And so what that allows them to see is to get feedback from another person. You know, maybe they would look at the case differently. Maybe they would provide feedback or different results than they would view on their own case, right? So I think that peer review process can be a really strong one, but again, really requires some expectations, some strength-based kind of level setting, and to be able to, you know, it can be a little bit vulnerable to have somebody else look at your case, and so I think it definitely takes some time to incorporate that. Another level of peer review would be to switch it between, you know, in our county, we have different operational regions, different areas, and we would like to be able to start swapping cases that way. When I worked in children's services, you know, we did peer reviews, but they were across counties. So you can take this, you know, to many different levels. And so, but that is definitely more of an advanced process. For customer surveys, surveys and calls, do you want to talk about this one, Stacey?
Sure. So I'll just be very frank that this was presented to me a lot further before we actually implemented it. And I thought, oh my gosh, calling our customers or our clients, we're going to be generating a lot more reports. But we ended up doing it just before I retired, and the outcome of this was very unique. And I'll have to say that I was pleasantly surprised by soliciting after the case was closed. The supervisors would pick one of these cases and call the client on the phone and had a script of what they would be asking, very not going off script, but asking very poignant questions. And the kind of feedback that we got was, thank you for sending somebody out. I mean, we got such great positive feedback from this that we wouldn't have gotten any other way if we hadn't called the client afterwards. And so while I wasn't very supportive of it first and very fearful that it might generate more reports, the overall outcome of this was just tremendous. The positive definitely outweighed the negative in this. But I also think having a script that the supervisors, whoever's doing these, so that they can ask those questions. And the kind of clients that we were calling didn't have any kind of capacity issue either, I'll have to say. If they had any sort of memory impairment, we weren't going to call them, because I was envisioning calling up and saying, oh no, your social worker didn't come out and visit me. So we were very specific about what some of these calls we were calling our clients on, but it has been very positive for us. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks, Stacey. So the next item is focused monthly reviews, right? So for example, in our county, there are certain things that we review every single month. And this is done by our external QA team. And so, for example, in our county, we look at cases that are over like 6 months old. So the majority of our cases are closed within 30 to 45 days, but there are a handful that stay open for reasons such as they're pending a public guardian conservatorship, or they're pending housing because we're working on putting them in permanent supportive housing. And so for these cases, our team will review these every single month to look to make sure that all regulations and all requirements are being met, even though the case has been open for quite some time, that it's evident as to why the case is open. And those monthly contacts, the service plan is being updated, the reassessment is being completed, right? So we'll focus our efforts on those. A couple other things we look at on an ongoing basis is risk assessment. So we have a report that identifies when a risk assessment is submitted, but it doesn't appear to be complete. And so what we don't want is we don't want staff submitting things to submit them just to be timely. And so we decided we want to focus on this every single month. We're going to look at things that are submitted incomplete. And so the idea is that we're giving feedback to the social worker and supervisor that, we noticed that when you submitted this, it was incomplete. Please, make sure that things are not submitted until they're complete. And it allows the supervisor and the social worker to recognize, number one, we are looking at those things. We can explain why it's important and why we value it being done another way. And we can really kind of try to nip some of that stuff in the bud. We do the same thing with contacts, right? So we look to see if we have any evidence of contacts being submitted with very few words. So as a placeholder, as opposed to like having the full content. We do things on vouchers. We, with the implementation of Home Safe across California, we issue a lot of vouchers for housing. And in order for our state reports to run correctly and for our fiscal people to have what they need, it has to be really documented in a specific way in the service plan and in the case. And we need certain evidence uploaded. And so we do a specific focused review every month on cases that involve vouchers that were issued. So those are some examples. You may have some areas that you have in mind too that you would like to review. We also do something called targeted reviews. So maybe during one of our regular reviews, something stands out, it's a trend, and we go, you know what, we need to take a look at that. So targeted reviews are intended to be short time, very specific to look at a certain area. One that we did is with our new case management system, when you had an open case and a new case came in and you were able to merge those cases so that you didn't have to do duplicate assessments, duplicate service plans. But what we found is when they were merging those cases, they weren't merging it correctly. And so we ran the risk of them leaving off perpetrators, leaving off allegations, leaving off things. And so we said, okay, this is so important. And so we did a targeted review. We identified the areas of concern. We, did post-training. Ironically, despite all of that, we found that there was still a level of error that we weren't comfortable with, and it was too risky. So we moved that into one of our focused monthly reviews that we do every single month. But that's an area that, it really started as a targeted review, and then we transitioned it to a monthly based on our continued findings. And then one of the things that, we're pretty proud of is before we used to implement programs and we were like, we do all these pre-implementation meetings and planning and scheduling. We implement a program and then we're like, yay, right? We cut the ribbon and we're good. But we realized that we didn't do enough follow-up afterwards to make sure that we were meeting the intended goals and intended outcomes. And so now in APS, when we do roll something out, we roll a new protocol. So we implemented a protocol on APS history alerts. So if the case had so much history within a specific amount of time, there was these requirements for additional staffings and additional activities and manager review and approval for closures. And with that, we did a post-implementation review. We established targets and we said once across the division we reach this target, then that's when our targeted review would end. But we did the same thing recently for a protocol we rolled out for us assessing depression and suicide risk at every risk assessment. We rolled out training, we rolled out policy, we rolled the program out, but then we got to the point where we really need to now review to see how it's going and have been able to really on a monthly basis track outcomes and track success. So that's an example of a policy program post-implementation review. Stacey, is there anything you'd like to add to this slide?
Just overall that I think in the handout section, we have some examples of some of these for you. And so please don't, make sure that you check out that area so that you can get some of these handouts and tips that we've got in there too. Thanks, Julie.
Perfect. Thank you. Next slide. So really just one of the things to really consider is when you're moving into these QA efforts, how are you going to document them? How are you going to track them? And I'm going to give our story, right? So when we first started, we started doing these really beautiful paper assessments. I mean, they were pretty. I was proud of them. We rolled them out. You know, you could check the boxes easily. It was easy for people to use, and then they would submit them to a centralized email, right? And that was great until we realized, well, how are we going to quantify the results? How are we going to track the outcomes? Like, this is a nightmare, right? Like, I don't know why we didn't think that through well enough, right? So then we started doing something through Google Forms, right? Because in Google Forms, when people submit stuff online, it at least dumps the data, the outcomes into an Excel spreadsheet, right? And then you can use Excel to kind of analyze and stuff. And I definitely think that was a lot easier than the forms, but you know, still not ideal. So we're at the point now where we've developed a database, and our staff are going to be able to go into this database, complete their assessments. All the data will be shared. There'll be some stock reports that we can run. And they'll be able to pull their own reports for their units and their teams and things like that. So we've definitely kind of come full circle, and definitely recommend you putting a lot of thought into your process before you kind of roll something out. Stacey, anything you want to add?
No, I think that you covered it all. Thanks, Julie.
Next slide.
So some considerations, like Julie was talking about, the reporting out of this information, making sure that your staff, your line staff, again, this goes into the buy-in, that they are understanding the data that you've collected. Either you're reporting it out through your supervisors or through monthly program meetings or through a monthly newsletter, but making sure that they're understanding this data and that they are having access to this data. It shouldn't be hidden from them. And then also trying to balancing out, you know, the strengths and your the areas of needing an improvement. Working with your training department to, you know, figure out what these gaps are that you have. And there isn't, again, a right or wrong way of how you present this out. I know a lot of people like the big colorful spreadsheets that are there, being able to send those out. Those are really nice. I was always very envious before we started this of some of the counties that had these spreadsheets here in California, and now Orange County has their own. So I think being able to show this quantitative, qualitative data that you have and being able to synthesize it, whether it's a summary of a quarterly summary or whether it's an annual report, but just make sure that you're sharing this information out, because you've taken the time to collect it. You've taken the time to have either your supervisors or managers collect this information, and then to analyze it, you need to make sure that it's shared out. And hopefully that can help better APSs across your state or across the nation too. Julie, anything you want to add to this?
No, just agree that it's very important, because it helps people see the outcomes and really see, you know, what we've been striving to achieve and how we're doing.
Next slide.
So really the final piece is, you know, we talked about moving from QA, QC to CQI, continuous quality improvement. So here's some recommendations, right? You know, to be like really have that CQI culture, you know, it's important to really, you know, review. You have these systematic review processes in place to really look at things that can improve practice and compliance with, you know, program regulations. It's that quality philosophy that encourages all team members to really be able to continuously ask what can be done better. You know, I'm sure we're doing great, right? But what can we do even better? How do we go from good to great? It really emphasizes that both internal and external customer satisfaction is paramount. So not only is this to help, you know, ensure that our clients outside our agency are receiving the quality of services they deserve, consistent services across the county, but it also, it does help us identify whether there's gaps within our own teams, within our own staff, inconsistent knowledge, inconsistent practices. And so really recognizing that our staff needs some consistency and support as well. really this philosophy that problems are not always caused by people. And so this process cannot be people focused. Jane isn't doing this. It's really about, if Jane is in an environment where she doesn't understand and she's making errors, it may be that, there's some gaps in training or there's some things that need to be done differently. Utilizing cross-functional teams. So just recognizing that it is helpful to have some external folks looking in, being a part of the process, being a part of the setting up such a system, because they look at things a little bit differently than us and they can ask some really good questions and recommend some good ideas. And then really allowing the data to help you identify problems and capture areas that would be priority for focus and improvements, for an upcoming year. But really, if you can kind of look at it this way, that's some ways to start moving into CQI. Next slide. And that is really the end of our presentation.
Great. Thank you, Julie and Stacey. Such great info, and Carl to kind of frame it on the national level. That's awesome. So, Carl, did you want to unmute and do some questions, or I see that we have a couple, or I can. Next slide. All righty. So, there you are. You're unmuted now.
So I gotta make this bigger.
And feel free to send in additional questions.
I'm having trouble with the box.
Oh, okay, no problem. So we had a couple, and I'm not surprised about the client survey. So I think, Stacey, this is for you.
Yep.
So was there a time frame you followed for how long after a case was closed to reach out? And were there any issues you found listed in the statute or law with contacting clients after cases were closed? So that's a little couple questions. Yeah.
Right. So our county had actually been doing this in the child welfare arena. So we were just following suit with them. And as far as a time frame that we use, so when our supervisors get their cases, they have 5 days from when the social worker submits it in order to close that case. So, and it's actually the supervisors that's closing the case, not the social worker. They're submitting it for closure. So when the supervisor is actually conducting this, the case is not closed. So that answers hopefully your question about dealing with closed cases or not, because there were some times when supervisors would review these and look at when they're going through and felt like, the social worker needed to do a little bit more work or legwork on that, and so would ask the social worker to go back out to do something, whether it's a tangible item that they needed to give back to the client, or maybe a resource that they gave them that the client hasn't connected back with. So the time frame was within 5 days of it being submitted for closure. And I'm not really sure. I don't think there is any sort of regulation that would prohibit us, because it wasn't a closed case yet. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, I think it does. And then another question that just adds on to that: did you also contact family with this survey as well as the clients, or was it just clients? Okay.
It was only clients. And so again, the supervisors had to be kind of diligent about when they were picking these cases out, that some of them were some self-neglecting cases that I know California is unique in that they investigate those, but looking at some of those cases to see, calling them. So family members was not something that, because then we're dealing with confidentiality. Had we talked to them, and do we have consent to even talk to family members too? So no, we did not talk to family members.
Right. And then do you remember what some of the questions on the script were? Or is that something you'd be able to share if people contacted? you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the general was the supervisors introduced themselves and said, I know that my worker came to visit you. Do you recall that? And then it was asking about, the generality about how the social worker was out in the field and, were they professional? Did you feel like your needs were met? And if the answers were, no to that, then is there anything that we can further do? So it wasn't just leaving that question out there that they didn't feel like, we helped them, but okay, what can we do to help, make and move this along and get you feeling like you are being serviced by us? Those were some of the questions, and I think it usually wrapped it up by saying, just educating them that, this is our hotline number. If you are ever in the need or, need to reach out to us, this is a number to call. So they were very short. It was only one page, and I think it was less than 3 questions. So it was very poignant and to directed as far as the questions go.
And Stacey, if I can add, just so you know, a copy of such a survey is included in their handouts. It's actually page 15 of their handout, so there is a nice sample for them to look at.
Yeah, that's what I thought. We had submitted something.
Great.
So.
Thank you. And you would think that the person who formatted that handout would remember that, but thank you for that reminder. That's awesome.
No worries.
Yeah, no. And then we have time for, it looks like one more question. Do either of your counties have veteran workers review cases? And I'm not sure if veteran means seasoned or maybe, retired.
In Riverside County, we actually did, but so we had a volunteer of like a retired supervisor. And when we were first trying to implement APS QA, they were amazing and they helped us really get some stuff set up. And we would definitely use them again if we had additional volunteers, but we've only had one so far.
And in Orange County, no, we did not have any seasoned staff. We have a mentorship program, and in that particular program, yes, the social worker's mentor kind of reviews the cases in that way, but not for a formal case review.
Great, thank you. All right, so I think we will go ahead and next slide, please. This has been really, really great. A lot of programs are looking into either beginning QA or up in their game with the formula grant funds. So we love to offer some resources when we have them. So again, the QA forms and report samples, which are awesome, and I will refresh my memory with those after this webinar, or in the handouts portion of your webinar box. We also had a revision to the QA toolkit recently. There's a QA brief, and then there was a promising practice spotlight looking at quality assurance in Hawaii, and I believe I saw some of our colleagues from Hawaii on, so aloha. And then I think everybody's familiar with the ACL voluntary consensus guidelines by now, but there is a link to those as well. So next slide. Thank you so much, Stacey, Julie, and Carl, for all your work on putting this webinar together. Really great and timely info. Thanks, Andy, for tech support today, and thank you all for joining us. We do hope to see you actually next Tuesday, for our APS TARC webinar for the field on strategies for APS cases involving homelessness and housing insecurity. Registration is still open, so contact us if you have not seen the notices. And all of our contact information and ways to follow us are up on the slide. And I want to wish you a great rest of your day and a great week. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.